Hi guys, my name is Samkit Siyal. I'm a sophomore here studying theater, and today we're going to look at what's wrong with male friendship. This is going to be an in-depth look at hegemonic masculinity, homophobia, and misogyny in men. Great. So, one quick thing just to get it out there. A lot of people say masculinity studies is a counter to feminism and women's studies. I say no to that because you can't understand and appreciate feminism and women's studies if you don't understand the systems holding women back. And that system, what Max called the patriarchy, that system is hegemonic masculinity. So that's just one quick thing. We're going to talk more about what hegemonic masculinity is, but just a quick definition. Hegemonic, hegemony just means ruling or dominant. So hegemonic masculinity is the ruling system of masculinity we have in place right now. So my thesis for my paper and this project is we're going to see that hegemonic masculinity affects male friendships negatively because it restricts male interactions to trivial subjects, and that keeps them from establishing deep and emotional connections. And we're going to look at hegemonic masculinity and how homophobia and misogyny fit into that. And we're going to look at two other theories alongside it. Expectancy violations theory, which is kind of going to back up the system of hegemonic masculinity, and inclusive masculinity theory, which is the complete opposite of it. So first things first, to understand masculinity and how we perform masculinity, we need to understand what sex and gender actually are. In this quote from Clyde W. Franklin's book, The Changing Definition of Masculinity, he says, sex is categorized as what genitalia you have. You are male if you are born with a penis, testicles, and an XY chromosome pattern. And you are female if you are born with a vagina, a uterus, ovaries, and an XX chromosome pattern. Gender is how you're socialized based on that sex, based on your genitalia. Gender is giving a baby girl pink and a baby boy blue. Gender is not letting a young boy play with Barbies and not letting a young girl play with cars. So now that we have that, hegemonic masculinity is, again, the ruling performance of the male gender right now. And in this quote from Connell and Messerschmitt, they say it's understood as the pattern of practice that has allowed men's dominance over women to continue. One important thing here, it's not normal in a statistical sense. Only a minority of men actually enact it, but it's normative. Hegemonic masculinity, as much as it is the top of the pyramid, it's not popular. Most men actually perform complicit masculinity, which is turning a blind eye to what hegemonic masculinity does in order to gain the benefits of it. And obviously the benefits of masculinity are, hegemonic masculinity are, men are at the top of every social ranking in any country in the world. Anywhere you go, men are ruling or in significant power. For centuries, men have ruled or been in significant power. So this has a pretty negative effect on men. This comes from a case study of 30 male meditators who were talking about how hegemonic masculinity affected their meditation and their meditation centers. This man, Dalton, says it's easier to show affection in the center where he feels trusting. Outside, there's a wariness, a critical voice of what other people might think. So even though he's trying to show affection, even though he's trying to branch out from these clutches of hegemonic masculinity where you can't show your affection or show emotions to other men at risk of being called gay or feminine, he's stuck because everywhere around him he's surrounded by men who are uncomfortable with that. But in his meditation center, there's openness to it because they're all trying to escape that together. So now we're going to look at how this actually affects male friendship. So this quote from Robert Garfield talks about the elements of friendship that men are really missing from their friendships today. You have connection, communication, commitment, and cooperation. men are afraid to connect and communicate with each other. They're afraid to actually share emotions and build long-lasting friendships with each other, and that causes men's friendships to be very brittle and thin. It makes it harder to actually create meaningful relationships. And again, they're afraid of doing this because they're afraid of being called gay or feminine. And that comes from hegemonic masculinity. Hegemonic masculinity is built on, as we saw, the oppression of women. It's built on the oppression of anyone that's not a heterosexual male. So this is from a case study of a 14-year-old high school freshman in a counseling relationship. His name's Carson, and right before this, he started crying. He says, "I'm sorry, I'm not some sissy boy who cries when they're upset. I'm not gay. You know what they say about men who cry. Crying is a weakness, you know? It's fine if I cry in here, I just have to make sure they don't see me as queer. I wouldn't have friends if they thought I was gay or trying to hit on them." So this whole idea that sharing your emotions, crying, having any emotions at all, not being invulnerable is gay or feminine has a really bad effect on young boys, older men, anyone, because it holds you back from actually letting you, speak and be open and vulnerable. So we're going to take a quick tangent. Expectancy violations theory is the idea that when we interact with other people, we have expectations of what they're going to do and how they're going to interact with us. Anything that violates those expectations, our brain immediately attaches a meaning to it. So as we saw with Dalton and with Carson, anything outside of hegemony, anything outside of hegemonic masculinity that a man tries to show emotion, to show affection, to cry, it's usually a sign a really negative behavior in the men around them. And again, with Carson, he's afraid of not having friends because he's crying. So that's kind of where that comes from. And social justification theory is just the idea that we want to uphold the status quo. Hegemonic masculinity is our status quo. We don't want it to change. It's too much work. Changing big things is too much work. So that's just this idea, and that's why all of these systems have stayed in place for so long. So back to the whole friendship thing. Victor Seidler talks about how most men have really, really thin and insincere friendships right now because they're too afraid to share their emotions, and that can have a really negative effect on men. It can stunt lack of emotional intelligence can stunt growth. Lack of sharing emotions can cause piled up feelings and bursts of emotions that usually are angry. And Lomas et al. Says it really well as well. He says, because men are supposed to be invulnerable, they have less of a support network than women, and that can impact their coping abilities negatively. So this is a complete shift. Inclusive masculinity theory is the new hip way to practice masculinity. So this whole idea is based around the rejection of homophobia and misogyny and inclusion of everybody. And we see from this quote, this is from a case study where a bunch of men who are friends in university, after they graduated, they're still really close because of this newer masculinity that they practice. They were open with each other and shared their emotions and were able to cry and laugh and show affection for each other. And that created such a tight-knit group of friends that they're still friends 10 years after their university and after they were really close. And so this is just kind of something to think about. Just because hegemony is in place right now, it's a system. A system can be overturned, a system can be changed and removed and displaced. And so the way we're headed in the world right now is we're headed towards inclusive masculinity theory. We're headed towards a newer, more open and inclusive masculinity that's beneficial for everybody. And that's really good for us because hegemony is, again, as we saw, has a really negative effect on young men and older men. And it's harder to actually have friendships with hegemonic masculinity in place. And these ideas can be used to address misogyny in the homosexual male community, among many other things, because this is not just singular to male friendships. This is happening all around us. So thank you. Thank you very much.